What happens when a tech startup with a predictive algorithm tries to outthink farmers who have been reading the subtle signs of nature for generations? You get a very expensive reality check that the age-old issues of agriculture aren't bugs you can patch in the next software update. This startup promised a digital revolution to India's oldest industry. But when the funding winter arrived and the crushing costs of rural logistics bled them dry, this startup withered on the vine. Its name, BharatAgri. Welcome back to The Flop Side, the podcast where we uncover the stories of Indian startups that once soared only to come crashing down. I'm your host Priyanka, and today we have a fascinating pivot from last week. With Nero, we saw a perfectly executed business get crushed under a sudden regulatory wall. But today's startup wasn't killed by ever-changing rules. It was buried deep in the dirt. We are talking about BharatAgri, which built a brilliant AI-driven app to revolutionize agriculture, bringing big data to the soil. Now, when you're pitching from the comfort of a modern air-conditioned boardroom, disrupting agriculture sounds like a noble, hyperscalable mission. You look at a spreadsheet, see millions of farmers, and think, let's build an app for that. But as we keep saying on the flop side, the ground reality is far more erratic. Just by betting millions on a software model, can you really transcend centuries of raw human learning to predict the unforgiving chaos of nature? They certainly thought they could. And they even convinced some of the smartest investors to fund their exact optimism. But as we'll find out today, high-tech data isn't always the solution. In this week's episode, we'll dig into the illusion of the massive agricultural TAM, the brutal math of rural logistics, and why this agritech darling ultimately starved.
Act 1. The Spark.
Now, in the startup ecosystem, a massive TAM, or total addressable market, is the ultimate bait. And if you're a tech founder looking for the biggest bait on the map, you look at Indian agriculture. Think about it. E-commerce is dominated by huge players. Fintech is also already pretty crowded. But agriculture? It is the undisputed foundation of the Indian economy, employing nearly half of the country's entire workforce. That isn't just a demographic. If you can digitize even a fraction of that, you are looking at a TAM with hundreds of millions of potential users, just waiting to be monetized. But here's the catch. Even with such a large workforce, agriculture contributes to only 18% of the national GDP. This is a sector that's largely stuck in the past. It operates largely on intuition, outdated farming practices, and heavily fragmented land holdings. The farmers are entirely dictated by the whims of the monsoon, broken supply chains, and an endless margin-eating maze of middlemen. To give you an idea of the sheer inefficiency, India is the second largest producer of fruits and vegetables in the world. Yet, as per a study published in 2015, we lose roughly 90,000 crores worth of produce every single year just to post-harvest rot and terrible logistics. It's an absolute mess. So when 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗙𝗹𝗪 and Sai Gole looked at this 5,000-year-old disorganized sector, they didn't see just a systemic crisis. They saw the ultimate disruption playground, the perfect opportunity for a flashy technological takeover. In 2017, they unveiled their solution to one of India's biggest optimization problems, BharatAgri, an AI-led farm advisory platform. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 aptly put it,
you can consider it as a smart farming advisory. Using daily, step-by-step instructions for farmers, we make sure that they get personalized advisory and insights about the soil, water, and weather conditions in their farmlands.
You see, they had identified the core of the problem. It was the gaping information asymmetry. Quality advice was inconsistent, non-personalized, and often biased towards input sales. Most farmers didn't have the means to know the exact chemical balance of their soil, the precise time to apply pesticides, or even the optimal seeds for their specific microclimate. Only a very small percentage of farmers at the top were wealthy enough to hire consultants for their farms. The ugly truth was that Indian farmers were massively underserved. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and 𝗙𝗵𝗲 promised to change that. The concept actually started back in 2015 as a college project the two were working on at the IIT Madras campus. Their vision was clear. A farmer downloads their app, inputs their farm details, and suddenly they have a personalized, data-driven digital agronomist in their pocket. In 2017, this college project officially became a company. And to their credit, they didn't just build this from a glassy city office. For their first year, the founders actually moved to a village in Pune, Maharashtra, working directly on a farm to understand the grassroots impediments faced by farmers. The following year was a grind of bootstrapping and research. They started with a B2B model, partnering with rural industries to onboard around 3,000 users. But they quickly realized the limitations of that chain. To truly capture that massive agricultural TAM, they had to go direct. So in March 2019, they pivoted to a business-to-farmer model. This is where their approach changed. They noticed that while farmers were hesitant to adopt flashy new technology, they were desperate for solutions to recurrent problems like pests and diseases. So BharatAgri didn't brand itself as a complicated AI software. They positioned themselves as an easy fix to a relentless pain point. To get into rural smartphones, they knew they had to strip away the Silicon Valley gloss. They needed an interface that wouldn't intimidate a first-time smartphone owner. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 claimed,
We made sure that while designing the mobile application, we use technology that is not very high-tech, so that even the newest Android or internet user could use it easily.
Then the pandemic hit. Forced to abandon offline channels, they leaned into a 100% digital distribution strategy. And it worked beautifully. By late 2020, they had proven their core software as a service or SaaS model, convincing thousands of farmers to pay around 600 rupees per acre for a 6-month premium subscription. The digital harvest was finally working, and as everyone in the business knows, actually getting people to open their wallets is the ultimate validation.
Act 2. The Illusion.
In the meantime, the agritech space was starting to get pretty packed. But most startups were just throwing generic, free weather forecasts at farmers. It was information that was largely ignored because it didn't apply to their specific acreage. But BharatAgri distinguished itself by doing the exact opposite. They offered hyper-localized, actionable intelligence, and the results spoke for themselves. Farmers using the platform were seeing up to 60% bump in their crop productivity, all while slashing their production costs by 20%. And when you actually make a farmer more money, suddenly a 600 rupee subscription feels like an absolute bargain. BharatAgri wasn't just acquiring users, they were also retaining them. They proved that the Indian farmer would pay for software, provided it actually worked. This gave them massive leverage. As co-founder 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗙𝗹𝗪 proudly stated,
BharatAgri is the only player that has monetized digital advisory at scale. During the pandemic alone, BharatAgri sold 13,000 plus premium subscriptions. Our unique advisory algorithm assists the users in increasing their yield and reducing their cost.
When you walk into a pitch with that kind of proven, scalable monetization, the term sheets practically write themselves. In September 2021, the venture capital floodgates opened. BharatAgri secured around 47 crores in a Series A funding round, backed by heavyweights like 𝗏𝗵𝗲 and India Quotient. All that money sitting in the bank signaled that BharatAgri had crossed the threshold from promising hypothesis to scalable product. This also meant the pressure was on, and while selling subscriptions is a great proof of concept, to hit those astronomical valuations and truly capture their massive TAM, they had to move faster. So BharatAgri made a bold, aggressive pivot. They realized that if their algorithm was already telling a farmer exactly which seeds, pesticides, and fertilizers to use, why not just sell those physical products directly through the app? It was a convenient, closed-loop ecosystem. And with the launch of their e-commerce platform, Krishi Dukaan, BharatAgri morphed from a pure SaaS advisory tool into a sprawling, rural marketplace. The top-line metrics exploded. They were soon stocking over 10,000 agricultural products. And with that momentum, they raised another 35 crore rupees in 2023 to fuel this new e-commerce engine. They were successfully delivering to over 20,000 rural PIN codes across India. Their unique monthly users skyrocketed past 10 lakh farmers. Their books too had a lot of impressive things to say, as their operating revenue reportedly shot up to 4.8 crores in FY24, making a massive 78% jump from the year before. They had the captive audience, the venture capital, and the revenue growth. BharatAgri was breaking past the barriers of limited tech access and deep-seated skepticism to lead the Indian farmer into the digital revolution. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 𝗙𝗪𝗪 very confidently claimed,
In the next 3 years, 50 million plus farmers will use the internet for the first time. And we want BharatAgri to be their bridge to the digital era of agri that is now dawning.
while the goal was ambitious, the sheer weight of their success was finally starting to break the scales. It looked like BharatAgri could be sinking.
Act 3. The Crack.
The problem with the digital revolution is that eventually you have to deal with the physical world. And in the Indian heartland, the physical world is heavy, expensive, and completely indifferent to your software scalability. This is where the grand illusion began to fracture. When the company transitioned from an advisory app to an e-commerce marketplace, they went from selling intelligence to moving 50-kilo sacks of fertilizer down unpaved monsoon-wrecked village roads. They essentially traded a high-margin software business for a low-margin trucking company. This created a fundamental disconnect in their business model. On one hand, you had investors tracking metrics like monthly recurring revenues and daily active users. On the other, you had the slow, rhythmic reality of the agricultural calendar. And while you can program consumer behavior, you cannot hack a crop cycle. A farmer only needs to buy seeds and fertilizer a few specific times a year. They aren't going to impulse buy pesticides at midnight the way a teenager would buy a shirt on Myntra. To bridge that gap, BharatAgri had to burn cash. In fact, the math was brutal from day one. To get a farmer to trust a digital app over their local trusted dealer took massive amounts of marketing spend and feet on the street. And once BharatAgri finally acquired that user, the repeat order rate was painfully low. The margins on farming inputs are razor thin, and the logistics of delivering a sack of fertilizer to a remote village completely vaporized whatever profit was left. By 2024, the numbers were screaming. Their total expenses were nearly 27 crore, driven heavily by employee costs and desperate marketing spends trying to keep the growth engine spinning. And while a 22 crore loss was a bit worrying, it was still okay for BharatAgri because venture capital was doing the heavy lifting. But then, the broader investment climate had drastically cooled. The agritech funding winter was here, and it was unforgiving. To give you a sense of the scale, in 2022, Indian agritech was pulling in over 6,300 crores. But by mid-2025, that flood had slowed to a mere 800 crore trickle. The atmosphere had fundamentally shifted. So when BharatAgri went back to the market to fuel their next stage of growth, they didn't find the usual line of eager investors. Instead, checkbooks were closed, and BharatAgri was left stranded with a high-burn business model and no more fuel to run it.
Act 4. The Fade.
There was no dramatic scandal, no explosive investigations, just a slow, painful starvation. In late 2025, the news quietly broke. Most of the team was let go and operations wound down. BharatAgri was dead-pooled. So, what are the lessons buried in the soil? Let's dig them up. The central challenge, according to me, lies in a misunderstanding of the business model. While digital agronomy creates real value for the farmer, it captures very little margin, especially when farmers are accustomed to relying on intuition or getting informal free advice from local dealers and peers. Which is why, for many agritech startups, the obvious answer is to use advisory as a wedge to acquire the user and then monetize through input commerce. But BharatAgri's story proves that unless subscription behavior is exceptionally strong, advisory alone is not a durable business model. And so, this is where the trap snaps shut. Such hybrid models introduce a lot of organizational complexity. That complexity is especially hard in agriculture, where outcomes are delayed, hard to attribute cleanly, and shaped by exogenous factors like rainfall, pests, and market prices. This generally makes it difficult for teams to know whether weak monetization is a product problem, a trust problem, a timing problem, or simply a category limitation. And specifically for BharatAgri, the logistics nightmare that came along with their hybrid pivot meant revenue was unable to keep up with skyrocketing costs, thus exposing their fatal dependency on external capital. A missed strategic alternative here was the lack of a phygital approach, which is basically a well-designed fusion of the physical and digital world, as compared to going with a purely digital approach. Rather than taking on the billion-dollar burden of a private supply, the path to survival likely lay in the ground with local partnerships. Instead of bypassing the centuries-old rural ecosystem, BharatAgri could have weaponized it. By recruiting local dealers as fulfillment partners, they would have delegated the last-mile nightmare to the very people who already had the infrastructure and, more importantly, the community's trust, thus effectively offloading both logistics and customer acquisition costs in one stroke. But perhaps the most profound lesson here isn't about supply chains or phygital pivots. It's about the fundamental clash between two different worlds. The tragedy of BharatAgri wasn't just a failure of logistics. It was a failure to respect the gravity of the sector they were trying to move. Because in the end, you cannot solve a problem this deep with just a software update. We call agriculture the undisputed bedrock of our economy. But for those working the soil, it often feels more like an anchor. It is a sector where the struggle is so ancient and the stakes are so visceral that change doesn't just happen slowly. It fights to happen at all, and for a very rational reason. The margin for error is absolutely zero. The unpredictability of the weather doesn't just cause financial stress, it breeds a constant crushing anxiety. A delayed monsoon doesn't mean a bad fiscal quarter. It's a matter of sheer survival. And yet, that is precisely why the attempt to change it is so vital. Startups like BharatAgri may have ultimately collapsed under the crushing weight of rural logistics and unforgiving venture capital timelines. But their legacy is not just a failed business model. They prove something fundamental. The Indian farmer is not stubbornly opposed to the future. They are desperate for it. By putting a digital agronomist into the pockets of 100,000 farmers, BharatAgri had pierced centuries of isolation. The failure of one company doesn't invalidate the mission. It merely clarifies the sheer magnitude of the problem. But the fact that our brightest minds are finally looking past the boardroom and into the mud means the hardest step has already been taken. The ground has been broken. Now, it just needs to be built upon. So before I go, I want to leave you with something to ponder on. If you were a founder, would you build your business to chase monthly metrics and unicorn valuations? Or would you be brave enough to build for the harvest? And that's your produce for the week. No pests, no diseases, just fresh, ripe lessons. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you're subscribed to the Flop Side so you don't miss what's coming next. But before we close the barn doors, here's one last seed for your brain. India grows more bananas and mangoes than any other country in the world, yet exports almost none of them because the domestic market eats them all first. I don't know about you, but I'm surely a part of the reason for those low exports. Now, if you've got an interesting take on anything to do with the startup world or a pitch deck you want us to dissect, find us on Instagram at 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗙𝗹�podcast. I'm your host Priyanka, and I'm here with my co-creator Nandita. Thanks for hanging out with us this week on the Flop Side, where we show you the flip side of flop startups.